So, first things first in synchronous technology. You want to make sure that here in the Pathfinder you're in your synchronous mode. And we're going to be using these sketching tools up here, which are in the Home tab, but they're also found over here in Sketching. And you get a little bit more detail when you go into here. So, again, this lesson kind of assumes that people are familiar with the Solid Edge interface. If you're completely brand new to Solid Edge, we've got some stuff on our YouTube channel. I'll be posting the link at the end of this. We've got one that just familiarizes you with the interface in our Intro to Solid Edge series. So, you know, if you want to take a step back and review that, by all means, because it'll at least get you oriented in the user interface. So, let's start by creating some 2D geometry. And in Solid Edge with Synchronous, you basically start by selecting what you're going to draw. In this case, I've selected a rectangle by center. And then you see that I've got kind of these green crosshairs that have appeared. And really, if I click once anywhere, that's going to create that center point of my rectangle. And as I drag it out, it'll create that shape. Now, if we just kind of rotate my view, and just for people really new to this, I'm just going to put this up on the side here. This is the cheat sheet that was sent to anyone who signed up for training, but it's basically a quick reference guide to moving and rotating with the mouse and the control, the Shift, Control, and Alt keys. I'm using a 3D mouse right now, which is an even better way to do things, but you know, use this if you get lost. So, I'm going to rotate out of plane, and we can see that that sketch that I created kind of lies on that front plane. If I go and pick something else, let's say a circle this time, you notice that my sketching has kind of reoriented. We can see that I'm kind of on what would be the ZY plane now. And really that's just because that's what my view is closest to. If I kind of roll my view up so I'm looking kind of down, you'll see that my crosshairs snap to that view. It's really going to whatever's the closest thing available. So I'll click to start my circle by center and just kind of drag it out. Now, just like I did before, we can key in that value. I'll just reach my mouse up here, and you can see in this command bar, it's got a value that's already highlighted. So if I want this to be, let's say, 10 inches, I can click that, and it'll create a 10-inch hole. Now, go back to my select tool, which is neutral ground, and let's see what I've got. I've got a sketch on this plane here, and I've also got a sketch normal to that on this plane. So, a couple of things to note about these sketches. The first one is that if you click over an area, it highlights, and that's because it's ready to be extruded into a piece of 3D geometry. We're not there yet. The other thing you can do is you can click on just the edge of the sketch. And when you do that, you're going to get handle points. Now, a circle has two handle points. One of them is the center point, which is right here. The other one is this handle point, which will be somewhere along the radius. And basically, clicking and dragging these will allow you to either resize or move that piece of sketch geometry. Similarly, if I click on a line, I get two handle points, one on each corner. I've also got the line itself, which when you click and drag will allow you to move the geometry normal to that line. So you should see your cursor turn into a little X or cross, and that indicates that you're over a key point. But the point is you want to click the line first to wake up those key points. All right, let's rotate my view once more to this side and go and pick another rectangle, let's say. And I'll place a rectangle. Now you can see that I'm mostly oriented towards the ZY plane. So when I click and draw that piece of geometry, it's on the ZY plane. So I've got three different planes, three different sketches. And in fact, if we go back up to my select tool and reach up here into our property tree and expand sketches, you can see that we have three different sketches. And by mousing over them, each one will highlight. Now let's orient so we're kind of looking straight on here, and let's draw just another piece of geometry. I'll click and draw another circle. Notice that as I draw that, it doesn't create another sketch, but it has indicated here that my sketch 1 is my active sketch. It's got a little pencil next to it. And that's because that it's adding any geometry that's on this plane to this group of geometry, which is sketch 1. So what we're getting at here is that any pieces of sketch geometry that are drawn on the same plane will get grouped into that same sketch. Now, we mentioned that if you click on the edge of a sketch, you've got this ability to modify the shape by grabbing these handle points. The other thing we can do, if you look up here, we've got this with this edge highlighted. Up in my ribbon bar here, I have a bunch of parameters. Like there's my diameter of my circle. You've also got this button stack here, and right now we're set to modify, which is going to modify this circle. The other thing we can set it to is move. And what that's going to do is that's going to give us our steering wheel, and it'll allow us to move any of the selected geometry that we've got. In this case, remember, I clicked on the edge of that circle, so now it's going to allow me to move that circle. Now, the steering wheel has a lot of functionality, and it's really worthy of its own lesson, which we'll be getting onto. But for now, all I want to do is I just want to highlight that major arrow, not the end point, but the major arrow. And you see it's barely visible there, but if I turn on my magnifying glass, you'll see that next to my cursor, it's actually giving me feedback that I'm going to initiate a move. And with this done, I can click and I can actually move this circle. And if we sort of change sides, what I'm doing is I'm actually moving it out of plane to a new plane, maybe a plane that's 8 inches away. Now, having done that, notice what it's done. It's created a new sketch, sketch 4, on which this geometry now lies. So the point is that even though these were drawn on the same plane and grouped as sketch 1, we can use that command to move geometry out to another plane, and it will group it into a new sketch because it now lies on another plane. So let's look at some other ways we can control what plane we're on. Up until now, we've sort of been manipulating our view and allowing our crosshair to sort of snap to any one of these normal planes. The other thing we can do is if we kind of come into this origin, if you, with a sketch tool already selected, in this case I'm in the line command, if I come over this area in here, you see that it's going to highlight a plane, and that's the plane formed by the Z and X axes. Now I can kind of jump around and you can see that it'll find other planes defined by those. If you want to see these planes slightly bigger, we can turn them on up here in our Pathfinder, the base reference planes. And if anyone's used normal or ordered modeling, these are typically on by default. So these are actually representations of these planes, and they have a certain size, but they're in fact infinite in terms of how big they are. So that's what's happening behind the scenes, but with these planes kind of highlighting, you notice that I get this little lock symbol. And you also notice down in my prompt bar, which is the white bar that runs along the bottom of my screen, it's telling me that I can either click to create the first point of my line, or I can press F3 to lock the plane. So if I lock that plane by hitting F3 when I've got it kind of highlighted over my cursor, now no matter where I move my mouse, it's going to stay locked to that plane. You can also actually directly click on the little lock icon. But now notice that no matter where I turn my view, I'm always on that plane. Now let's go over here, and I can pick up on this geometry, and I'll just draw, clicking once to place the first point of my line and clicking again to end it. You see that it's got yet another line, and I'll just move it until I see that I'm connected to an endpoint here. And then it'll continue drawing lines until I hit right-click or escape or go back to my select tool. And again, because we were locked to this plane now, you can see that I've got my indicator up here indicating that we're stuck on this plane. And also in my sketch stack, a little pencil next to my active sketch, meaning any geometry I add to this will be on that sketch. So I can draw all kinds of things in here. Now let's talk about some of the things that we can do with this sketch geometry. Sketch relationships. These will be very familiar to anybody who's been modeling and ordered, but what these do is these help put a little bit more control over your sketches. So for example, I've got this triangular region here, and maybe I want to center the point of this over the center point of this rectangle here. So I'm going to use a horizontal-vertical relationship, and I'm going to pick up on that endpoint and then find the midpoint of this line. And when I see that there, I'll click it. And what it's going to do is it's going to line those two up together. Now, if you don't see this little alignment, you just want to look up here and make sure that relationship handles is turned on. With that off, you just kind of see your sketch geometry. You don't see the sketch relationships in the background. So you want to make sure that's on. You also want to make sure that maintain relationships is on. Otherwise, what you're going to get is kind of like AutoCAD data in that nothing will hold together. Because of these relationships now, if I click, let's say, this line and then try to drag that endpoint, it's going to move that sketch to maintain that relationship. Let's place another piece of geometry, again, still locked to that plane, and if you come unlocked for whatever reason, maybe you've clicked on this lock button, just grab any sketch tool and just find that plane and hit F3 to lock it. Okay, so now I've got a circle here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw that circle, and I'm just going to come along the bottom here, wait till I see that midpoint, and I haven't clicked to start my circle yet, but you'll see that your cursor kind of wants to stay in line there. And I'm going to click once, drag that cursor out, and notice it's automatically put a horizontal relationship in there. So now, no matter what I grab in here, it'll keep that circle centered on there. The other thing we can add is dimension. So I can put a dimension, and I'm doing a distance between, and I'll put that between the bottom edge of my rectangle and the center point of my circle. And let's set that to 1.5. Now, no matter what happens, that dimension will hold that. So slowly I'm kind of providing more and more control into my sketch. So at any point now, I can select any one of these regions, click on it, and extrude that out. Now once I do that, you'll notice that my sketch goes away, but my dimension stays. And let's just take a look at what's happened here. We still have this sketch geometry, which wants to be a region, but now we have a piece of 3D geometry. I can click on any one of these faces and click this large arrow once, and that will move that back and forth. Now notice that my sketch, which remains, is still tied to there, but I'm now driving it by clicking on the faces. And this is kind of the theme of synchronous technology. The sketch is not driving the geometry. Once you create a 3D feature, that's totally on its own. In fact, the sketch that we used to create this feature is now down here in this little bin called Used Sketches. And if I expand that, we can see there's my sketch. It's been consumed, but it no longer has any effect on my geometry. You see that I can click this dimension and change that dimension to move that, what's now become a hole. Maybe I'll key in 2, but that doesn't have any bearing on the sketch, nor does the sketch in the background affect any of this 3D geometry. Now, if I want to bring that sketch back, we can right-click on it and hit Restore. And that brings it back, and I'll just swing around to look at it from the other side, and you'll see that it brings it back as its own region that we can then reuse again and again, but it's no longer driving this piece of 3D geometry. Okay, I'm just going to click on that feature that I created and delete it because I just want to focus a little bit more on some sketch geometry. Notice too that these two lines have they've turned brown, indicating that they were constrained to something which is no longer there. And that's because when we created the protrusion, they inherited a relationship to those corners which no longer exist. So I actually don't need these anymore, so I'm just going to hold down Control, click both lines, and hit Delete. Now remember that anything I draw on this plane here will be added to what is called Sketch 1. We can override that by right-clicking on Sketch 1 and unchecking this Merge with Coplanar Sketches. What that means is that if I now draw on that plane, and again I'll pick my rectangle, I'll move over to my front plane, lock the plane, and draw it. So I've drawn on the same plane as Sketch 1, but notice that it's created Sketch 6 now, because we've toggled off that merging of coplanar sketches. So what this does is this allows us to create multiple sketches on the same plane. Notice too it also disabled those regions. I can't click in there, whereas in my new Sketch 6 I can. That's another setting in here that we can turn on and off. So for example, Sketch 6, I can uncheck Enable Regions from here. So, a couple more things I want to show you in the sketch environment. One of them is IntelliSketch, and this is an option that I use quite frequently. It's over here in Sketching, and it's under IntelliSketch Options. We click on that. One thing I want to start with anyways is the ability to automatically create dimensions for new geometry. Remember before we kind of roughed this out and then placed dimensions in between? A feature I like to use is automatically create dimensions for new geometry, but only when geometry is created with a keyed-in value. What this does, and again, I'm still locked on my sketch plane here, if I were to draw a rectangle just by roughing it out, I don't get any dimensions on that. However, if I was to click to place my rectangle and key in that I want it to be 4, and I'll hit Tab for my next dimension by 2, for example, and I'll hit Tab again and put it at 0 degrees. So we're doing this kind of old school 2D drafting way, but it's a nice fast way to create things. If I do that, then it creates dimensions on that geometry, which I can then click and update. Now, speaking of dimensions, the other thing we can do, and I'll click on Sketch 6, which is these 3 squares that I've drawn on this plane. One thing that we can do, I'm going to enable those regions so that I can extrude that out. I'm also going to right-click, and you see that we can check or uncheck Migrate Geometry and Dimensions. What this means is that if I extrude this region, it's going to bring those dimensions out with it. And these dimensions, I can now click and adjust. If I just hit undo a couple times and right-click on that sketch and turn off Migrate Geometry with Dimensions, now when I create that piece of 3D geometry, the dimensions are tied to the sketch, not the actual 3D geometry. So that's another setting you can control whether or not you want to migrate your dimensions. And really, as we're going to see in synchronous technology, it's a good practice not to bring too many locked dimensions in. You're going to find that it's better to kind of, just like in parametric 2D sketching, it's better to create the general shape of your part and then start dimensioning it once you have all the 3D geometry in place, which is kind of a vastly different way of thinking to traditional 3D modeling. So, having gone through all that, I want to take us through actually modeling a part, or at least creating some base geometry and then using sketches to add more geometry to that. And what we're going to create, and I'll just jump back into my PowerPoint here, we're going to create that feature that we had at the beginning there, that part. So let's use this applied knowledge and go through and create this. So I'll just move this over to the side here, and you got to love Windows 7 for its ability to dock planes, or to dock windows, just so we can see this over on the side. And let's bring back up Solid Edge. Okay, so we got a lot of messy geometry here. Now we can go and actually delete stuff. You know, you can just box in and hit delete and delete anything you want. One thing you might notice is that if you create a box and you accidentally catch your base coordinate system in there, if you hit delete, it'll delete everything but the base coordinate system and then tell you off for trying to delete the coordinate system. So you get that a lot sometimes when you're deleting things. In this case, though, just because I've done a lot, I'm just going to close this without saving it, and I'm going to open up a new part. And again, I'm going to do this in ANSI, so we'll be working with imperial dimensions here. Okay, so let's take a look at this part here and decide how we're going to model it. And again, in an ordered environment, there's a lot of rules to creating features and stuff. You're kind of less constrained in synchronous. The idea is get that geometry there, make it roughly the right size, and then tweak those dimensions by putting dimensions between things or pulling things into shape. The idea is that you may not necessarily know the exact end dimensions until you finish your design process. So let's start that off. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to IntelliSketch, which again is in your sketching ribbon right here, this little pencil with a light bulb over here in the IntelliSketch section. And I'm just going to turn off automatically create new geometry. I don't necessarily need to create dimensions for new geometry. And then I'm going to go to my rectangle by center. And because we're going to be doing a lot of drawing on this plane, I'm just going to mouse over till I see that plane between the X and the Y, and I'm going to hit F3 to lock. Now another good command that's going to come in handy is that sometimes it's a little bit awkward drawing on a plane but still looking at it in an isometric view. What we can do in this case is go to View and turn on your sketch view. This is kind of a handy technique, and it works in ordered or in traditional. But what this sketch view will do is it'll just kind of, once you have your plane locked, it'll snap you into looking straight down. So let's try to get everybody on the same spot. And again, I'll just hit escape and get out of that and unlock my plane and show you again. I'm going to go to the rectangle by center, and I'm just going to kind of mouse around until I get that plane highlighted between the Z and the X. You might notice if you get to kind of too close in there, you might get other planes. We really want this one right here. That's kind of our front plane, and I'll just hit F3 to lock. And then I'm going to hit the sketch view, which is also Control H, and that'll bring me looking straight on this. Now, I want to kind of rough out the general dimensions of this, so I'm going to start by clicking this origin point once, and that'll create the center point of my square. And then I can kind of eyeball it, or in this case, I'm going to actually key in the dimensions. And you can do that just by hitting numbers. So I hit 4 for my width, and I'm going to hit Tab to jump over to the next parameter, which is my height. And I'm going to hit 1.5, and then Tab again. Now, in this case, I can key in a 0 degrees, or you see that with my, and I'll just zoom in so we can see this a bit better, with my mouse, I can just kind of position this, and it'll want to snap to like a 90-degree orientation. So I'll just let it kind of snap here and click, and that will place that 3D or that sketch there. Okay, so we need kind of a rounded end to this, so I'm going to jump over to my circle. Now, because my plane is locked, I shouldn't have to re-lock or reposition my plane. I should always be drawing on this plane, and I'm just going to pick up on the center point of this, click once, and then drag up and grab an endpoint here and click again. And what that's done is that's created a circle that is the same diameter as the width, or I guess the height of my rectangle. Let's put in that center hole as well, so I'll click here and I'll drag that out, and again click to place it. And this time I may want to put a smart dimension on that diameter, because I know I want this to be 0.5. So once I place that, I can click on it and point 0.5. Just some tips when you're dealing with dimensions, and this works whether you're in a 2D sketch or using 3D dimensions. If you click the actual number, that will prompt you to change the value. And you can change the value by keying it in, or if you position your cursor over the window, you can kind of roll that, roll your mouse to change the value. If instead of clicking on the actual number, I click on the handle, that now gives me 2 handle points that I can use to kind of reposition how my geometry is displayed. And clicking on the number will position where it is. So that's kind of good to remember, because when you get into 3D geometry, it can get a bit busy. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is draw a couple more features in here. So let's just zoom in here. I want to kind of cut away some of this material. So I'll just draw again. I'm not concerned about dimensions. All I'm concerned about is that I've got it on the horizontal vertical, and then I'm accurately either connecting to another line or overlapping it. Again, in Synchronous, we don't have to be as fussy when it comes to locking or erasing lines, just as long as we've got the general shape somewhere in that sketch. I'm also going to add this piece down here on the side by clicking somewhere on this face, down some distance, and just walking over until I see it kind of snap to that endpoint, clicking again, and then dropping that line in there. And then I'll right-click to end that command. So now, you know, we've got a lot of overlapping sketches, and if this was an ordered feature, they wouldn't allow us because it wants a nice clear definition of the profile. In Synchronous, it's not the case. I'm going to switch to my Select tool, which again is up in this top corner, or you can hit Escape, or if you're adept at using the right-click menu, you can hold down right-click, and it's by default situated here at about 10 o'clock. So while holding down the right mouse button, I'm just going to come up to Select and right-click to release. And I'm just going to rotate out of plane a bit, just so I can see what I'm doing here, because our next step is we're going to take all this geometry and extrude it out to create a 3D feature. So you notice that we got a bunch of different regions here, and we actually want several of them. So I'm going to click on one first, and then instead of clicking this arrow to kind of start extruding it, I'm going to hit the space bar. And what the space bar does is allow me to multi-select. So I'm going to go down and I'm going to pick up on the other regions I want to add. We want to grab this, we want to grab this. We don't want to grab the inside though because we want to leave that as a whole. Okay, now I click on this arrow to extrude it out in some direction. And what I'm going to do up here, just like in Ordered, this toolbar, which is kind of context sensitive to whatever we're doing, it's got some options. One thing I want to turn on is my symmetric extent. I want this to come out symmetric from the plane I drew it on. And I'm going to key in a distance of 1.5. Just by typing, you'll see it'll type it in there, so I'll type in 1.5 inches and hit enter. So let's see what we've got. Part of our sketch has been consumed, and you can see it here in used sketches. That's been used up, but we still have some of the remaining lines that didn't get consumed by the creation of this feature. And they're still there waiting to help us out as part of sketch 1. I'm going to turn them off for now because right now I don't need them. And again, we're interacting just with this geometry. Okay, so what's the next thing we do? Well, now let's try sketching on another plane. So I'm going to select my circle, and we should have been unlocked from our plane. If you still see the lock button, you can click it to turn it off, or you can hit F3. This time we want to draw on the top face, and you can see as you kind of mouse around, different faces will highlight, and your cursor will snap to that. Now we have a lot more choices of places to draw on. So I'm going to get this face highlighted, and again hit F3 to lock. Now you don't have to lock your sketch plane. You can just start drawing, but I find it, especially if you're going to do some complex geometry, it's kind of nice to lock that plane, and then again Control H to snap us into that view. So I'm going to create this hole cutout here, and I'm going to do that just by drawing a circle in here. And the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to kind of mouse over and wake up that midpoint so that when I come over, I'm in line with the center of that. And I'll click once to place that hole. Now maybe some dimensions to finish this off. I want to drop this in here, and let's say we want to make it a 3/8 hole. So I'm going to go 3/8, just like you would in an Excel sheet, and hit enter. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to establish a distance between the center of my hole, which I can pick up, and you'll see you'll get feedback on your cursor when you grab it, and the end of the edge there. So I'll click and place that. And let's make that 3/4 inch for now. Okay, rotating out of plane and going back to my select tool so that I can grab that region. Now if you have trouble grabbing that region, you may want to use Quick Pick, which experienced solid edge users will know all about this. Hold your mouse steady and you wait for the little ... and the right mouse click icon to come up. Then click, and you can kind of cycle through what it is you want to select. And what we're looking for is this region in here. So clicking on that will highlight the region, and clicking on that arrow will create a feature. Now it's still got me in a symmetric extrusion here. I'm just going to reach over and turn that off. And notice that if I come out of the sketch, it'll add material by creating a protrusion. If I push in, and I'll just zoom in so you can see that, it's actually cutting it away. Now in this case, all we have to do in Synchronous is come through the bottom of the part to create that hole. Lots of ways you can do that. You can just make sure you're well clear of the part with that visual feedback, or you can go up here and adjust some more parameters, like changing our extent option to through next. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow you to pick an arrow, and it'll just punch that all the way through the material. Okay, a couple of things to note in here. Notice that our dimensions migrated with it, so we can use them as handles to change the dimension. And in this distance dimension, the only thing you want to note is that depending on which side you're kind of mousing over when you click on that number, it will move either the back face of this part or the hole itself. So in this case, I don't want to change the back face, I want to move the hole, so I can just make sure I'm on that right side, and you can see as I change that, it's that hole that's moving. Keep in mind, if you pick the wrong thing, you've also got these two arrows, and this is called directional dimension control. This is really nice because basically what you're saying is, yeah, accommodate this dimension by either moving one face or another, and it'll highlight to show you which face it's making. So lesson in Synchronous is that when you're adjusting a dimension, make sure you see what face is highlighted and change it if necessary. Now I've been rolling around and making kind of a mess of this. If I want to kind of just reset before I get out of this command, undo or Control Z is the way to go. If you hit Control Z, it'll reset everything and allow you to kind of pick that dimension again. So again, I might click this and adjust it to, let's say, I don't know, 0.8. Okay, note too that these dimensions are pink. That's because it's inherited it from the sketch and it's locked those dimensions. And what a locked dimension means is that if I click this face and drag it out, it's going to hold on to that 0.8 dimension and keep that hole where it is. Now that may or may not be what I want, and at any point I can click on that 0.8 dimension and in the same toolbar unlock it. So with it unlocked, it's blue, and now when I move that face, it'll allow me to do that. We'll do a whole series on dimensions, live rules, and manipulating faces, but that's sort of a crash course for now. Okay, next thing we want to do is create this cutout here. And let's grab our line command, and again, make sure you're not locked to anything because we want to highlight this face, and with it highlighted, hit F3 to lock. And then I'll Control 8 and jump into that sketch plane. Now, I'm going to draw, starting outside of my part, I'm going to draw a horizontal line, drop down and drag it vertical, and then back again out horizontal, and then right-click to exit out of that. Now, I want this to be centered on my kind of midpoint because I want this to be sort of a symmetric cutout. So I'm going to use a sketch relationship to drive that, and that's that horizontal-vertical sketch relationship, and I'll line it up with my origin here. Something to watch out for with the horizontal-vertical relationship is if, let's say, I'll just drag this over here, and let's say I kind of drew something more like that. If you look, the midpoint of my line is actually closer to the origin in the vertical rather than the horizontal. So what can happen in this case, and I'll just drag it so is that if I do a horizontal-vertical relationship between the midpoint and the origin, it's actually going to snap vertically as opposed to horizontally because that's what's closest. So keep that in mind that the horizontal-vertical will do whatever's closest. So if that's not what I want to hit undo, and I want to click that line and just pull it back a bit so that I got more distance. And now when I do my horizontal-vertical, it's dropped in there. Okay, now I don't know this dimension yet, and really that doesn't matter. What I want to do, just like we've done before, is rotate out. But this time, notice that I don't have a region to click on outside of this curved face. And that's because my sketch doesn't lie on the curved face anymore. So what I need to do is if I want to kind of cut through all that, I want to pick up or use some more commands here. And what we have is we have the Extrude command. So if we click that, by default it wants us to select a face to extrude. I'm going to change that to chain. And all a chain means is it means a sketch that's continuous. So you'll see now we can select that whole edge there that we drew. The next thing we want to do is make sure that we're actually removing material and not adding material because we're cutting it away. So I'll click remove. And then it's kind of hard to tell what to do now, but if you read your prompt bar at the bottom, it'll tell you right-click or enter to accept. So I'm going to right-click, and then it's going to ask me to pick the side that I'm cutting away the material. And if you think about this, I want to remove material on the inside of these lines, so I'll click, and then that'll allow me to cut that away. And again, I'll just pull that past this. So now we've got that on as 3D geometry, and at any point now we can click and manipulate this. Or drop a dimension on any edge and then define the shape. In this case, direction doesn't matter because it's symmetric, and live rules, which are down here, will detect that symmetry. Again, we're going to do a whole series on live rules, so don't be too concerned about them right now. Let's make that 0.5. Okay, last thing I need to do is drop another hole on this face here, which is a countersunk hole. Now I'm not sure if I've got enough space for that, so I'm just going to switch back to my select tool, grab this face, and just pull it back a bit, just until I've created that hole and I know that I've got enough placement for it. So last time we did this by drawing a circle and using it as a cutout. This time we're going to use the actual hole command. So I'll click on a hole command, and by default it'll always put a 1/4 inch hole on the end of your mouse. And you notice that as you kind of, if you're not locked to any plane, as you kind of mouse over these planes, it'll kind of flip orientation to whatever plane you're on. You can even put it on curved faces, which is kind of neat. In this case, I want to lock to this plane, so I'm kind of waiting until my hole is on the right plane, and then F3, or I can click this little lock symbol to lock it on there. Now the other thing I want to do is I want to change the parameters of my hole. I said I wanted a countersunk or a counterbored hole, so I'm going to go in here to my options and select from the drop-down menu countersink, and I'll switch that to I want a 0.25 diameter, but or sorry, not countersink, counterbore. I want a 0.25 diameter for my hole, but I want my counterbore depth to be 0.25 as well, with a 0.5 counterbore diameter. If this is something you plan on using a lot, remember that you can type a name for it and you can hit save, and now it'll always come up as an available option in this list. So I'll hit OK and then place that. Now, a couple of things to note when placing a hole. If you mouse over endpoints, just like when you're placing sketches, you can kind of lock it to a center point. The other thing you can do is, as I come near, let's say this point here, if I hit E, C, or M, that will slap me to an endpoint, center point, or midpoint. So as an example, I'll kind of bring my cursor over to this edge, and when that edge highlights, hit E. And what that's going to do is that's going to place a dimension in there for me. So now I can kind of snap it so it's at the middle, and then key in, let's say, 0.5, and then hit Tab as my dimension. And what that's going to do is that's going to position it exactly 0.5 inches from that edge. So that's one way you can place it kind of on the fly. The other option is just to drop it in there and then place a dimension after the fact. There's kind of no right or wrong way. Personally, I like dropping it anywhere and then using the steering wheel or dimension to place that with some precision. Just remember when you place your dimensions to make sure that you're adjusting the right side. Okay, last couple of things to add. We need a cutout along the bottom here. So I'm going to start drawing a line. And again, remember, if you can't get that plane, make sure that you're not locked to that plane. You want to click that to unlock it and let it lock to another plane. Now in this case, I'm going to start drawing by selecting that bottom edge, coming out. In this case, I haven't gone into my sketch view. I'm going to let my mouse feedback and the crosshairs on my cursors tell me when I'm horizontal or vertical. And I'm going to drop that in there, and then it'll give me a region that I can click on and extrude out. Now, in this case, you notice that, well, what if I wanted this to be symmetric? I don't think it's symmetric. In fact, I know it's not, because when I click on this, Solid Edge is not detecting any symmetry. So a good question people ask is that, what if I've gone and created that face? You know, how can I make that symmetric? And there's really a lot of answers to this. An easy way to do it is to grab the whole feature, and you can see it's listed down here as a cutout. And when I grab that, it'll grab all the faces that are associated with that. Now this is kind of a more advanced steering wheel move, and again, we're going to cover this in the future, but there's my arrow right there. If I click once on that center node, that allows me to place my steering wheel wherever I want. And you'll see it'll kind of want to snap to edges and faces. So what you want to do is you want to snap it to this edge, and as you come along, see if you can find that center point there. It should highlight up there. And then I'm going to click, so I've placed my steering wheel on the center point. So what I've actually done here is I've said I'm going to move these features, and this center point is going to be my control spot. And what I can do now is click on that minor axis and start a move, and that's sliding it back and forth. Now because I've picked up on the center point, all I have to do is find some feature that's on the center, in this case the origin, and click and place it. And what that's done is that centered the midpoint of this onto my origin. And what the result of that is now is a symmetric relationship. So again, good way to move a feature or groups of features or faces. You know, just grab the faces. You can also do this just by multi-selecting and grabbing those two faces, and then click once so that your steering wheel's on the end of your cursor. Drop your steering wheel onto an edge, and then move it along until it kind of snaps to that center point, and then you've got a control point that you can use to line it up. And any feature that's centered will do. You know, you can pick up on the center point of this hole, for example. Just make sure that you're key point filter isn't set to something that you can't get. If you were looking for a center point, make sure that you've got center point selected. Okay, final steps in creating this is to put a radius on this face. So I'm just going to click around. Radii are pretty straightforward. You click, it'll place the radius, and away you go. Now I know that radius has kind of come over the my face a bit, but we can move that face down if we didn't want it interfering with that radius. And then similar command underneath the button stack is the chamfer, and we can click here and chamfer that back. Let's say, just to change that, let's say we wanted it at 0.15, 150 thou of an equal setback, and now we've chamfered that. So with the general shape now, we can put dimensions anywhere we want and adjust this. And I encourage you to give this a play. We'll be going into how to manipulate faces and properly use dimensions, but give it a try. Click on faces, use the arrow to adjust them. Click on multiple faces, for example. If I grab this face, hit space, and grab that hole, that'll move the two of them together. You can also try controlling that by locking dimensions. Lock that distance between the two, and now they'll always come along for the ride. So this is really the benefit of having a synchronous model now, that we can kind of edit it in numerous ways, put dimensions wherever we want. So that pretty much wraps up today's course.